Dear delegates, let me first salute and welcome you as participants in the 12th Münster University International Model United Nations Conference. I'm honored to be invited by the organizers to act as patron of your important conference this year. Even though urgent engagements in conflict prevention and resolution did not allow me to personally attend this event, I am pleased to share with you, though through this indirect medium, my perspectives on the nature of the conflicts our world faces today and a glimpse of the work of the United Nations in the area of peace and security to date, which I hope will help in your deliberations during your conference. Reflecting on war, Karl von Clausewitz said, and I quote, "Every age has had its own kind of war, its own limiting conditions, and its own peculiar preconceptions." End of quote. The time has never been more urgent to engage in an inclusive and forward-looking debate on how to solve the global challenges we face today and those you, the future generation, are likely to face tomorrow. In today's world, the security landscape has become increasingly complex. Our world now faces conditions different than those that existed in 1945 when the United Nations was formed. The nature of conflicts has shifted from interstate, that is between states, to intrastate, that is within states. A broad array of state and non-state actors, political and economic blocs and forces shaping the global landscape have surfaced. There is a growing range of non-traditional risks and challenges which affect us in unpredictable ways, such as terrorism, widespread migration, climate change, and nuclear proliferation, among others. Globalization and the revolution in information and communications technology have brought about greater interdependence, emphasizing the inseparability of internal and external security. Geography is no longer a constraint for those who wish to commit and perpetuate violence. If we look closely, the challenges mentioned above share common characteristics, and addressing them requires us to change the way we think about security. These challenges affect all nations, women, men, and children collectively in all walks of life, generating a collective and multifaceted concern. Doubtlessly, addressing them requires a global and holistic approach. The United Nations has had to adapt to face these challenges. Peace and security is no longer seen as a purely military issue. There has been a growing realization that other factors, such as economic, environmental, and social-cultural conditions, have national, regional, and global implications. Indeed, in this strategic environment, characterized by fluidity and uncertainty, the United Nations has been trying to make a difference, examining security in a wider scope and cooperating more comprehensively and proactively with partners. The second United Nations Secretary General, Dag Hammarskjöld, said that the UN, and I quote, was created not to lead mankind to heaven, but to save humanity from hell. I end the quote. Since it was established in 1945, the United Nations organization has helped save millions from different kinds of hell, be it extreme poverty, diseases, starvation, or exposure to multiple risks, as they fled wars. Through its specialized entities, It has enhanced access to education and helped establish good governance in many post-colonial settings. The United Nations engagement in addressing conflict has been expanding from the simple peacekeeping or peace observation intervention between two states at the start. UN responses to conflict have increasingly become multifaceted, comprising diplomatic engagement to reach and implement peace agreements, robust peacekeeping to protect civilians, and early recovery activities to address the needs of conflict-affected communities. But many question the effectiveness of these efforts, criticizing the United Nations bureaucracy and, as many say, the uninclusive composition and undemocratic politics of the Security Council. While many do agree that the Security Council remains an effective mechanism in the pursuit of peace and security, some feel it is constrained by the veto power of a few permanent members, the victors of the Second World War. And they argue that besides becoming more inclusive and representative, the Security Council needs to achieve increased operational effectiveness with not only an overhaul of the decision-making process, but also increased attention to early warning and preventive consultations on potential crises, and greater recognition of the role of regional organizations and partnering with them in addressing threats to peace and security in their respective regions. More thus remains to be done. The organization must repurpose itself to adjust to evolving global scenarios and become more effective in addressing non-traditional and transnational challenges. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, has embarked on a reform process of the United Nations Secretariat aimed at generating a more effective peace and security architecture, a more coordinated development system, as well as a streamlined, transparent, and accountable management. Reforming the structure and modus operandi of the United Nations as a whole, for it to become a more effective instrument of collective decision-making and action to face current and future peace security challenges, however, remains the prerogative of the member states. It is representing these states you are gathered here to discuss. The challenge our world faces at the moment, with tendencies towards unilateralism and attempts to sideline the UN in dealing with threats to peace and security that have regional and indeed global implications, is critical, and the expectations of the whole of global society for your appropriate decisions are great. Historically, it took the devastating wars in early 19th century between European countries to come up with the collective agreements in the Vienna and Berlin conferences to regulate relations between nations. But then, without mechanisms for regulatory enforcement, such agreements could not prevent the First World War. It took that devastating war to create a more articulated and inclusive collective instrument, the League of Nations, in 1920. However, that too was too loose, and it took the much more devastating Second World War for a more inclusive, more empowered, and better structured United Nations to emerge, with the aim to avoid any and all global wars. Let us hope the world will never have to experience a third world war in order to come up with what would be perceived as a more effective instrument of collective decision-making once again. The United Nations has the essentials but needs to be continually assessed and reformed with changing times and conditions to remain an effective instrument, and that is the challenge you, the new generation, face. I hope and trust you will carry your discussions and interaction here with that responsibility in mind. I wish you successful and productive deliberations. Thank you.